In this video, I'm going to be using Accent Study 1 from the book Linear Freedom. For those of you with the book, it's page 25, and it deals with a 16th note accent study. And I'm going to be talking about and demonstrating various linear-based interpretations using that accent study. The basic idea is we are retaining a 16th note rhythmic feel. 3E and 4E and On top of that, we're going to apply our accents as they are found in the study or whichever rhythmic source material you are using, and those accents, those rhythmic hits, are going to be applied as bass drums. So to give you an example, the first 4 bars of Accent Study 1 look like this, and I'm going to play those on the bass drum, filling in the gaps with this 16th note roll. Sixteenth notes, keeping that single roll going, substituting those accents for bass drums. Now in this video, I'm not going to go into the mechanics of that because I've talked about that in other videos, and Linear Freedom itself explains all of that concept. So check those out if you want to explore the actual mechanics of what I'm playing there, but it's relatively simple. I want to be talking about the applications for this material today. This is a 16-bar study, so you can choose your favorite parts or use whichever rhythmic source you're working on to pick a slightly more isolated phrase. So I'm just going to stick with the first 4 bars today. And there are lots of different things we can do with it. The way I just demonstrated it there puts the emphasis on the accent itself, as you would expect. These are accents after all. Musically speaking, from your performance perspective, musical expression, that accent is kind of acting as the moving melodic part, and the snare drum strokes are just filling in the background texturally, right? So we're really playing with the accent here. If I play those top 2 lines again, those first few bars, you will hear how it is the bass drum that is acting as the main rhythmic force here. If I remove the hands, we can hear that bass drum line just on its own. This sort of approach is really quite rhythmic, really quite expressive, really quite musical, without being overly flashy or chops based, right? Because this is all about presenting and playing with the rhythm. So you can imagine if you're in maybe quite a jazz fusion sort of setting and there's a sort of solo thing going on, maybe a vamp. We don't want some massive gospel chops thing blazing around the drums, but we want to be quite rhythmic. We really want to be responding to the music and maybe the accent pattern going on. We can use this sort of thing to do that. So again, if I play the first few bars in a sort of context, you will see when I break into the solo vamp, that bass drum is once again leading everything, and I'm just keeping time on the hi-hat. That's really quite a nice way to play. It's quite a nice way to solo because it's really cool. There's a lot going on. It's very rhythmic, it's very expressive, it's quite fun. It sounds great, but it's quite laid back as well. You're not just blazing around. It's about responding to what's appropriate. And sometimes this sort of laid back linear vibe can really add a lot of depth to what you're playing without being overbearing. Notice towards the end there, I started to orchestrate those 16th notes on the hands in a way that wasn't a big, heavy, accented fill. I was just adding a little bit of melody, right? So if we take the first two lines, it looks like this. I'll put it on screen for you. We've got this really interesting, almost polyrhythmic bass drum pattern that's happening every 5/16 notes in the first place, and then every 3/16 notes in the second bar. So it sounds like this on its own. Which is quite a nice 2-bar phrase. I really like that one. I like the way how it kind of stretches out and then condenses at the end with those groups of 3. This is the sort of thing that needs to be the feature of what you're playing. Because if we're overdoing it, that's cool, but that's something else, right? That's not featuring that bass drum rhythm. So perhaps our first step here is to really lay back, treat these as almost ghost notes on the snare drum, and really listen to how that rhythm breathes. Once we're comfortable doing that, we can start to explore maybe some minor accents on the hands and orchestrating those, as I say, to give a bit of melody to our playing. So if I just loop those first 2 bars, and I can start to explore with some accents and some orchestration to see how it changes the overall phrase. So when you're exploring the orchestrations there, when you're playing with the different accents and ghost notes and voicings, you have to be careful to retain that bass drum as the main focus point. It's not a problem if we move into other concepts later on, but for the whole point of this concept is expressing that bass drum, right? So if we're doing something completely overbearing on the toms or on the hands, we're losing that a little bit. Another thing I was starting to do there was add in some diddles and a bit of orchestration, a bit of variation on the hands, just to again thicken out that texture in between. So maybe if we've got these groups of 5, adding in some diddles, doubling up some of those individual strokes can really fill that out a little bit as well. Again, be careful not to overdo it. It sounds quite nice adding that on the toms as well. So if you're working on this sort of thing, you can imagine playing your entire study, your entire accent study source in this way, and really just letting that bass drum take over and just decorate it slightly with the hands. Use the cymbals maybe, add in some diddles, orchestrations, and experiment with dynamics as well. Moving on now, completely reversing this, we can turn the hands into the feature. We stick with that single stroke roll and we essentially use those bass drum strokes as rests, right? So if I just stick to that top line for now, yes, I'm just playing those hands louder, but it has the effect of making that snare drum rhythm be the main emphasis point. That's my main rhythmic feature now, rather than that bass drum. It maybe becomes more obvious if I play it on the tom. I can split that between 2 toms. Although I think that loses the effect slightly, we can hear that same rhythm voiced on a cymbal, like the hi-hat. And if we like, we can keep that bass drum a little quieter to really let that hand rhythm sing a little bit more. And this is kind of dynamically the opposite to what we were doing a moment ago. Previously, we were emphasizing that bass drum. Now we're emphasizing the hands in between and letting the patterns and letting the rhythms of the hands do most of the rhythmic work for us. This can make for quite a nice fill effect if we take this around the drums. So again, sticking to that first bar. That gives us essentially a very simple 16th note fill, but gives us some rhythmic variety by essentially taking some rests and converting them into bass drum strokes. By emphasizing the hands, that bass drum really sinks into the mix. It becomes much less of a feature, but the linear elements are now really working together because they're dynamically much more equivalent to one another. This is a really nice way to break up a simple fill if you're a little bit bored with something like that. By introducing these bass drums as part of an accent pattern, it can be a great way to keep a similar vibe without completely ruining the feel or making it overcomplicated. It can just break up that rhythm on the hands really nicely. We can take a sort of motific approach now, where we combine these previous two approaches, where we are emphasizing the bass drum and then we are emphasizing the rhythms in between them. So if I take the top two lines, I'll play it once through, the first 4 bars, first emphasizing that bass drum pattern, secondly emphasizing the hands in between and doing a sort of call and response type thing, and it can give a lot of variety to your phrasing. Can be quite a nice way to keep a bit of variety in your playing without taking on too many phrases at once. This is keeping it relatively simple in terms of your actual material and using different interpretations to do something interesting with it instead. Moving on, we can of course take these as a groove, using a sort of linear approach for our groove playing. If I stick to the first bar here, which looks like this, basically working with our groups of 5, I'm going to voice the hands between the hi-hat and the snare, and I'm basically going to move whichever hand it is down to the snare drum for the downbeat on 2 and 4. Or I can treat that left hand as a ghost note. That left hand can travel in between, becoming ghost notes or hi-hat strokes. And then I can carry that same pattern on around the drums in one of the variations I've already talked about to keep the pattern the same, keep that bass drum rhythm the same, but apply the pattern now as a fill. So I never need to break my flow, I never need to change what pattern I'm playing, I'm simply changing my application from the groove into the fill, keeping that same pattern all the way through. Etc. And that's just the first bar. I can take that through the first 4 bars now, and we can see what that does for us. I'll keep it simple to begin with. Now, in some of these accents, in some of these bars, I don't think we're actually going to get the downbeat on 2 and 4 because they're bass drums. So I'm just going to go to the nearest snare drum instead, the nearest hand note. That's going to give us a little bit of displacement on that downbeat. So the first 4 bars, keeping it simple to begin with. You can start to hear there I'm having a bit more freedom, I'm having a little bit more fun with it, varying what I'm actually playing. I'm still just working through those first 4 bars, sticking with that same accent pattern, but I'm now moving more freely between the hi-hat and the snare drum. We can be a little bit unorthodox with this now and start thinking what else we can use this for. Essentially, this is kind of some source material, and it's up to you what you want to do with it, but of course this is taking a sort of linear-based approach to that source material. This time, I'm going to have my left hand the cross stick position with the snares off. My right hand is going to be playing between the rim and the skin of the snare. My left foot, I'm just going to splash the hi-hat on the beat, and I'm going to run through the first 4 bars as I've been doing before, but in this new position. This is going to give us kind of a Latin vibe. This time, we're going to move across into a jazz idiom. We're going to take it from a basic swing pattern, and I'm going to swing the notes this time. I'm going to treat them essentially as swung 8th notes, and I'm going to play them as a jazz solo within my swing time. I'm still playing the same pattern. I'm still voicing it the same. I'm just changing the rhythm this time, and I'm going to do it twice through. First, I'm going to do it with the bass drum. Secondly, I'm going to do it with the hi-hat, so that hi-hat is actually playing the linear elements this time. Sounds like this. So we've covered a fair few applications there. We've looked at emphasizing the bass drum as the rhythm. We've looked at emphasizing the hand strokes in between the bass drum as the emphasis point. And we've looked at voicing these as grooves and kind of flowing time patterns around the drums. Beyond that, it's really as far as your imagination can take you. So thanks for watching. I think it would be really interesting if you sent me some of your ideas for linear applications. As I said, I've been using Accent Study 1, page 25 from Linear Freedom. There are dozens of accent studies in the book using all sorts of subdivisions and different time signatures as well. So there really is a lot of application for you to be getting on with in there. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks very much.